السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد صلاة تنجينا من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وترفعنا بها عندك على الدرجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات إنك على كل شيء قدير. Welcome to our second lesson on Irshad Tullab al-Haqa'iq إلى معرفة سنن خير الخلائق, guiding the students of realities to knowing the best, the sunnahs of the best of creation. Inshallah, our lesson will cover the following. First, let us go through the course outcomes and lesson outcomes. So today, inshallah, our lesson will be on Sahih Hadith. This is our first lesson, the first category. There are 9 categories. Inshallah, in today's lesson, we will go through the 4 key discussions and 4 key related issues to Sahih Hadith. So today's lesson is all about the Sahih Hadith, and there are 9 key discussions. Out of the 9 key discussions, we will discuss 4 key discussions, issues, masail, related to Sahih Hadith. Our course outcomes are as follows, as we went through last week, inshallah. And our today's lesson outcomes are as follows. First, I will briefly go through the 65 categories of hadith mentioned in the book. As you are well aware now, that this book is a summary of Muqaddimah ibn Salah, the well-known work Ma'rifat Ulum al-Hadith, which is known as Muqaddimah ibn Salah. Hafiz ibn Salah, he mentioned 65 categories. What Imam Nawawi did, he summarized these 65 categories, anwa', into his book Irshad Tullab al-Haqa'iq. So I will briefly go through the 65 categories, the names, and then we will start the actual book. The first category will be Sahih, Ma'rifatul Sahih. Ma'rifatul Sahih, knowing what is Sahih Hadith. And there are 9 key issues, discussions that will be mentioned in this category. Example, he will mention what are the Asahul Asanid. What is Asahul Asanid? What is the most authentic what is the most authentic chain of narration? What is the most authentic chain of narration? There are various opinions. Imam Nawawi will mention 6 opinions. So the definition of Sahih Hadith will be mentioned, then a discussion regarding the Asahul Asanid, is examples given by different various scholars. And then we will discuss the first four key issues related to Sahih. Like I mentioned, there are 9 key issues in this category. In today's lesson, we will discuss and read about the first 4 key issues. The key concepts of today's lesson is introducing the 65 categories of Ilm al-Hadith that are mentioned in this book. The second, Sahih Hadith. What is Sahih Hadith? It will be defined. And what is As-Sahul Asanid? What are the most authentic chains of narrations? And the conditions of Sahih Hadith. The Sahih Hadith will be defined. What is Sahih Hadith? And there are 5 conditions, 5 particulars that need to be found for Hadith to be classified as Sahih. And who are the first compilers of Sahih? This will be mentioned and discussed. And then we'll read about, within this discussion, we will read the first 4 issues, Masail, discussed by the author Imam Nawawi. So these are the categories of Hadith. These are the categories of Hadith. First category is Sahih. This is our point of discussion today. There are 9 discussions, and I will read the first 4 key discussions. Sorry about this. Getting used to this. So the second is Hasan. The third is Da'if, Musnad. So these are discussions that will take place within the book. Some will consist of a page or 2. Some will consist of only a page. Example: Hasan, Da'if, Musnad, Mawsul, Mawdu', Mawquf, Hadith Maqtu', Hadith Mursal, Munqati', and Mu'dal. So example, these are 11 categories. Then you have others as well. Tadlis, Shadh, Munkar, Mutaba'at Shawahid, Ziyadat al-Thiqat, Al-Farad, Al-Mu'allal, Al-Muttarab, Al-Mudraj, Al-Mawdu', and Al-Hadith al-Maqlub. صفة من تقبل روايته ومن ترد روايته. Then كيفية السماع للحديث وطرق تحمله. Yes, the arrow needs to be going towards the right. كتابة الحديث وضبط الكتاب، كيفية رواية الحديث، آداب المحدث، آداب طالب الحديث، العالي والنازل، مشهور، الغريب عزيز، غريب الحديث، المسلسل، ناسخ الحديث ومنسوخ، المصحف، مختلف الحديث، المزيد في متصل الأسانيد، معرفة الأكابر الرواة الأصاغر، and so on. رواية الآباء عن الأبناء. Sorry, there is a الأسماء والكنى. Then you have ألقاب، المؤتلف والمختلف، المتفق والمفترق. Finally المتركب من النوعين قبله. This is the final page إن شاء الله. Yeah, so finally these are the 65 categories. المتشابهون في الاسم، المنسوب إلى غير آبائهم، النسب على خلاف ظاهرها، المبهمات، تواريخ الرواة والوفيات، الثقات والضعفاء، من خلط في آخر عمره من الثقات، طبقات العلماء، الموالي, and then finally أوطان الرواة وبلدانهم. So these are the 65 categories. Each will be discussed in a page or two or more by Imam Nawawi. So starting the book inshallah, قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا به وبكم آمين. We will discuss and we will read the book inshallah, then we will summarize everything from the slides. So the author, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, wa nafa'ana bihi wa bikum amin, he says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, قال العلماء الحديث ثلاثة أقسام. Hadith is of three types. Hadith is of three types. صحيح وحسن وضعيف. Sahih, the rigorously authentic. Hasan, the second type, is good or the fair. And da'if, weak. So he says, النوع الأول, he says, the first category. The first category. Like I mentioned, this is a summary of Ma'rifat Ulum al-Hadith, also known as Muqaddam ibn Salah. He mentions 65 categories. So Imam Nawawi also mentions 65 categories. Imam Sayyid in his Tadrib al-Rabi, he has mentioned 93 categories. Imam Bulqini, he has added another 5 categories. So there can be many categories according to the lack of narrators and the sifat of the sanad and so on. However, these are the most important categories, 65, as mentioned by Imam Nawawi. So for the first is An-Naw' al-Awwal, the first category regarding Sahih. وَفِيهِ Masail, and there are key discussions, and there are 9 key discussions in total. The first discussion is Al-Ula fi haddihi, regarding the definition of Sahih. He says, وَهُوَ مَتَّصَلَ سَنَدُهُ. Sahih is that hadith whose chain of narration is connected. This is the first condition. That from the Rawi, from the narrator to the source, i.e. the Prophet ﷺ, there is a connection right until the source, i.e. the Prophet ﷺ. From the Rawi, from the narrator, right up till the source, i.e. the Prophet ﷺ. So this is the first condition of Sahih. مَتَّصَلَ سَنَدُهُ, that its chain of narrators are connected. بِنَقْلِ الْعَدْلِ. بِنَقْلِ الْعَدْلِ. The second condition is that the hadith has to be transmitted by a fully upright person, full of integrity and trustworthiness. With the transmission of a person who is full of integrity, trustworthiness and upright. The third condition is al-dhabit an mithlihi, that this person is dhabit, that he is precise and accurate in his transmission, i.e. he is so much precise and accurate in his transmission that he fully transmits from his memory and book. That this person, this Sahabi, etc., and so on, these narrators, they transmit from their own memory or from the book, precisely and accurately. An mithlihi, from the likes of them, And the person that they are narrating from, they are also similar in their uprightness and also in their transmission, that they are precise and accurate what they transmit from their memory and book. This is the third condition, بِنَقْلِ الْعَدْلِ, by the transmission of an upright person. And dhabit, the third condition, is that the narrator is precise and accurate, transmitting it from the book or from his memory. And the fourth condition is وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَاذًا, that it is not shadh, that it is not shadh. What does he mean by this? Is that the Rawi, the narrator, he does not contradict a trustworthy person. He does not contradict a more trustworthy person. So the وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَاذًا, that this hadith is not narrated by a person and he does not contradict something which is more authentic. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَاذًا, and it is not anomalous. i.e. he does not contradict something which is more authentic. And fifth and final part and condition of this definition is وَلَا مُعَلَّلًا, neither the hadith has a hidden defect, إِلَّا وَلَا مُعَلَّلًا. So this is the definition of Sahih. Shaykh Nuruddin Itar, in his own words, he defines each of the 5 conditions of Sahih. Like it is mentioned, as you can see, he says, وهي خمسة نوضحها. المراد بالحد التعريف وقد اشتمل هذا التعريف على شروط الحديث الصحيح وهي خمسة نوضحها فيما يلي. That this definition consists of certain conditions, and these are total 5, like I've just mentioned, and he elaborates on those 5 conditions, and I have just also summarized them in my own words. So then he says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ فِي حَدِيثٍ وَإِذَا قِيلَ فِي حَدِيثٍ, when it is said, when it is stated about a hadith, that a specific hadith, that this hadith, إِنَّهُ صَحِيحٌ, إِنَّهُ صَحِيحٌ, that this hadith is sahih. You find in a book that the hadith is sahih. What does he mean by this? So Imam Nawawi says, فَمَعْنَاهُ مَا ذَكَرْنَا, it means what we have just above mentioned. What we have just mentioned above. فَمَعْنَاهُ, the meaning of this is that what we have just mentioned, i.e., it fulfills these 5 conditions. Thus, it will be classified and graded as sahih. Then he says, وَلَا يَلْزَمُ أَن يَكُونَ مَقْطُوعًا بِهِ فِي نَفْسِ الْأَمْرِ, and it is not necessary that this hadith is decisively sahih in reality. It is not necessary. It does not entail. It is not necessary that this hadith is decisively 100% in reality sahih. There is that slight possibility it could be less than sahih, or it might not be fulfilling the criteria of sahih. But according to the criteria of the muhaddithin, and due to it fulfilling these 5 conditions, it is categorized as sahih. Although in reality it might not be otherwise. It might be otherwise. In reality it might be otherwise. So he's saying, وَلَا يَلْزَمُ أَن يَكُونَ مَقْطُوعًا بِهِ فِي نَفْسِ الْأَمْرِ, and it is not necessary that the hadith authenticated as sahih, it is in reality as such. It is in reality as such. But due to fulfilling these 5 conditions, we will deem and we will understand it to be sahih. So this is a nuanced type of understanding and point mentioned by the scholars of hadith. وَكَذَلِكَ إِذَا قِيلَ, and likewise, when it is said, a certain hadith is غَيْرُ صَحِيحٍ, and it is not sahih, it is not authentic. What do they mean by this? They mean, فَمَعْنَاهُ, it means that لَمْ يَصِحْ إِسْنَادُهُ عَلَى هَذَا الْوَجْهِ الْمُعْتَبَرِ, that this hadith is not sahih. Why? Because its isnad, its sanad, its chain of transmission, it is not sahih. Its chain of transmission, it is not sahih. How? Based on what? Based on what criteria? Based on the considered mentioned criteria as mentioned above, due to it not fulfilling the above conditions that we have just mentioned above. لم يصح إسناده على هذا الوجه المعتبر, على هذا الوجه المعتبر, due to it is isnad, its chain of transmission, it is not authentic. على هذا الوجه المعتبر, due to the above mentioned criteria and definition. لا أنه كذب في نفس الأمر, لا أنه كذب في نفس الأمر. By saying غير صحيح does not mean that it is in reality kadhib, false. It could be sahih. It could be sahih. It could be categorized as sahih in reality. But due to it not fulfilling the above 5 conditions, it is categorized as غير صحيح. Due to it not fulfilling the above 5 conditions, it is graded and classified as غير صحيح. Then he says وتتفاوت درجات الصحيح بحسب قوة شروطه. And the levels of sahih, they vary. And the levels of sahih, they vary according to the strength of the conditions, according to the strength of its conditions. Like above, there are 5 conditions, and obviously these 5 conditions, they would vary in their strength, in the understanding. So according to the strength of these conditions, there are many levels of Sahih. There are many levels of Sahih which will be discussed later on, inshallah. So this was the first issue key discussion, i.e. the definition of Sahih. The second key discussion is المسألة الثانية. The second key discussion, المختار أنه لا يجزم في إسناد بأنه أصح الأسانيد على الإطلاق لعسر ذلك. That the chosen opinion, the preferred opinion, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah is saying that it cannot be definitely, decisively stated regarding a sanad, regarding a chain of transmission, that it is the most authentic chain of narration. One cannot say that this specific chain of narration of this imam, of these imams, it is the most authentic chain of narration. So he says, La al-Mukhtaru, the chosen opinion is that it cannot be decisively stated regarding a isnad, regarding a chain of narration, that it is the most authentic chain of narration. Ala al-itlaq, unconditionally. لعسر ذلك, because this is difficult to claim. Then he mentions six opinions. Various scholars. These various scholars, prominent various scholars, have stated according to opinion which is the most authentic chain of narration. So he mentions the first opinion. He says, وقال أحمد بن حنبل وإسحاق بن راهوي. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Ishaq ibn Rahawai, according to their understanding and opinion, the most authentic chain of narration is أصحها الزهري عن سالم عن أبيه. The most authentic chain of narration is that which is narrated from Zuhri, from Salim, and Salim narrating from his father Abdullah ibn Umar. So Asahu al-Zuhri, the famous Imam al-Zuhri, Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, he narrates from Salim, who is the son of Abdullah ibn Umar, and he narrates from his father, i.e. Abdullah ibn Umar. So according to these two Imams, this is the most authentic chain of narration. The second opinion is of وقال علي بن المديني وعمر بن علي الفلاس وغيرهما. Ali ibn al-Madini, Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas, and others besides these two, they say the most authentic chain of narration is Muhammad ibn Sirin, when he narrates from Abida, and when he narrates from Ali radiallahu anh. Abida as-Salmani, as mentioned in the footnote. Abida bifatil ayn was Salmani bifatil sini wa sukunil lam. This is the second opinion. The third opinion is of the famous great Naqid and Hadith scholar Yahya ibn Ma'in. He says أصحها الأعمش عن إبراهيم النخعي عن علقمة عن عبد الله بن مسعود. The most authentic chain of narration is by Al-A'mash. This is his laqab. Nickname. His name was Sulaiman ibn Mihran al-Kahili. When he narrates from Ibrahim al-Nakhai, Imam al-Nakhai, the Imam and Faqih and Hafiz, when he narrates from Alqama, and when Alqama narrates from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So this is the third opinion. The fourth opinion is وقال Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba. Abu Bakr ibn Shayba, he is of the opinion that the most authentic chain of narration is أصحها الزهري, is when Imam Zuhri he narrates from an Ali ibn al-Husayn, and when he narrates from Ali ibn al-Husayn, an Abihi, and when he narrates from his father, and when he narrates from Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The fifth opinion is of Imam Bukhari. وقال أبو عبد الله البخاري. He says أصحها مالك عن نافع عن ابن عمر. That the most authentic chain of narration is Imam Malik when he narrates from Nafi', and when Nafi' narrates from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is, according to some scholars, it is known as the Silsilat al-Dhahab. like it is mentioned in footnote 3, Al-Imam Malik ibn Anas al-Alam al-Shahid, the famous prominent scholar, when he narrates from Nafi, and Nafi was the famous freed slave of Abdullah ibn Umar, when he narrates from Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He says, وَتُعْرَفُ سِلْسِلَةُ هَذَا السَّنَدِ بِسِلْسِلَةِ الذَّهَبِ. This sanad is known as the golden chain. This known as the silsila chain is known as the silsilatul dhahab. Then he ends the discussion. He says, and mentions the final opinion, the sixth opinion. He says, قال الإمام أبو منصور عبد القاهر التميمي. Imam Abu Mansur Abdul Qahir al-Tamimi, he states, فعلى هذا أصحها الشافعي. So based on this, the most authentic chain of narration is of Imam Shafi, when he narrates from Imam Malik, and when Imam Malik narrates from Nafi, and when he narrates from Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhum. لإجماع أهل الحديث, due to the consensus of the muhaddithin, على أن الشافعية أجل أصحاب مالك, that Imam Shafi is the most prominent companion of Imam Malik radiallahu anhum ajma'in. Anyway, so these are 6 opinions. Imam Nawawi, like he mentioned right at the beginning, al-mukhtaru annahu la yujzam fi isnad, that the choices, the best opinion, the preferred opinion, is that one cannot say for definite that a certain sanad is the most authentic sanad. The third discussion is أول من صنف الصحيح المجرد. Who is the first person, or who are the first compilers and scholars of hadith who have mentioned Sahih, authentic Sahih hadith, prophetic traditions in their book? So he says أول من صنف الصحيح المجرد أبو عبد الله محمد بن إسماعيل البخاري. The first scholar of hadith who has written and compiled mere just authentic traditions, prophetic hadiths, authentic rigorous hadiths, is Abu Abdullah Muhammad Ismail al-Bukhari, Imam Bukhari. Then ثم أبو الحسين مسلم بن الحجاج القشيري. Then it was Abu al-Husayn, this is the kunya, Imam Muslim bin Hajjaj al-Qushayri. This is the second scholar of hadith. وَكِتَابَهُمَا أَصَّحُ الْكُتُبِ. The books of these 2 scholars, Imam Bukhari, Muslim, is considered to be the most authentic compilations of Sahih hadith. بعد القرآن العزيز, after the Quran al-Aziz, Quran al-Kareem, باتفاق العلماء, by the consensus of the ulama. Then he says, وَأَمَّا قَوْلِ إِمَامِنَا أَبِي عَبْدِ اللَّهِ الشَّافِعِي. Imam Abu Abdullah al-Shafi'i, he has said, ما أعلم في الأرض كتابا في العلم أكثر صوابا من كتاب مالك. Imam Shafi, he stated once that I am not aware of any book, ما أعلم كتابا في العلم, I am not aware of any book in the lands, في الأرض, yeah, that has more authentic hadith, comprises of authentic hadith than Imam Malik's book of hadith, Muwatta Imam Malik. So according to Imam Shafi, he says that I am not aware of any book which is more authentic and more correct, that has authentic traditions, than the book of Imam Malik, Muwatta Imam Malik. So the reply to this is, Imam Nawawi says, فَقَالَهُ قَبْلَ وُجُودِ الْكِتَابَيْنِ. So Imam Shafi was of this opinion before the existence of the 2 books of Imam Bukhari and Muslim. Before the existence of these 2 books, Muwatta Imam Malik was considered to be the most authentic book. Then he says, ثم إن كتاب البخاري أصح الكتابين صحيحا وأكثرهما فوائد. Then he says that indeed the book of Imam Bukhari is the most authentic of the 2 books. Bukhari and Muslim, Imam Bukhari's book is the most authentic. وأكثرهما فوائد, and out of the two, وأكثرهما فوائد, and out of the two it is the most that has the beneficial points and features. Then he says, giving a reply to an opinion, he says, وقال أبو علي الحافظ النسابوري وبعض شيوخ المغرب. Imam Abu Ali Hafiz Nisapuri and some of the Mashaykh of Maghrib, they are of the opinion that Muslimun Asahu, that Imam Muslim's compilation of Sahih traditions is the most authentic. However, was Sawabu al-Awwal, the most authentic opinion, the most authentic is the first, i.e. the first opinion, the most correct opinion is the first opinion, that Imam Bukhari's Bukhari is the most authentic. However, scholars say that maybe in terms of husn al-tartib, fairly good organization, Imam Muslim's compilation of hadith can be considered to be the best in terms of husn al-tartib, having a good organization of all the hadith. Like Imam Nawawi rahimullah, he says, and he ends the discussion and he says, قلت, I am of the opinion, واختص مسلم بفائدة, that Imam Muslim's book Muslim has many specific features. واختص مسلم بفائدة, that Imam Muslim's book Muslim has specific features and virtues. Like I mentioned, that it has husn al-tartib, it has a very good organizational feature. Then he says, وهو أنه يجمع طرق الحديث في مكان واحد. What good about Imam Muslim's book is that he compiles all the turuq of hadith, all the sanad, all the chains of transmissions in one place. وهو أنه يجمع طرق الحديث في مكان واحد. ثم إنهما لم يستوعبا الصحيح والتزما بذلك. Then Imam Nawawi says that these two great Imams, Imam Bukhari Muslim rahimahumullah, they did not comprehensively compile and document and mention all the Sahih prophetic traditions in their book. They did not compile all the prophetic traditions in their book. وَلَا الْتَزَمَا ذَلِكَ, neither they made it binding upon themselves. They only compiled many thousands of hadith, but according to what they thought was Sahih. There were many others. So they only compiled what they thought for now are the most authentic traditions. So ثم إنهما لم يستوعبا الصحيح ولا التزما ذلك. Then indeed these two Imams, they did not comprehensively try to gather all the ahadith, all the authentic hadiths into one, into their books. Neither they made it binding upon themselves. They did not do iltizam, i.e. they did not make it binding upon themselves that they have done as such. بل صح عنهما تصريحهما بأنهما لم يستوعباه. In fact, their statements have been correctly mentioned, بل صح عنهما, but it is valid to say from these two great Imams that their statements is also mentioned. But in fact, their tasrih, their clear statement, also suggests so that they did not comprehensively claim to gather all the prophetic traditions, authentic traditions in their work. So anyway, there's an opinion. Hafiz Abu Abdullah bin Makhram, he is of the opinion that he says لا يفوتهما من الصحيح إلا قليل, that these two books of hadith, they have not missed out on any sahih, any authentic tradition, except for a few. So how can this be so? So the scholars interpret this opinion of Hafiz Abu Abdullah bin Makhram by saying that what he means here is that Hafiz Abu Abdullah al-Makhrami is saying that a high level of Sahih traditions that cannot be found in any other work except for these two works. These two works of Imam Bukhari Muslim have a very high level of Sahih traditions, authentic traditions mentioned in their book. This is what he means, Hafiz Abu Abdullah al-Makhram. He is not saying that there are no other Sahih traditions mentioned in other books. So La yafutuhuma min as-Sahih illa qali means that these two books, Imam Bukhari Muslim's books, have not missed out on any Sahih traditions except for a few. He means that only these two books have a very high level of authentic traditions. وَالصَّحِيحُ قَوْلُ غَيْرِهِ. So Imam Nawawi rahimahullah is saying that the correct opinion is of others. The correct opinion is of other scholars who say إِنَّهُ فَاتَهُمَا كَثِيرٌ, that these two works of Imam Bukhari and Muslim, they have missed out on many other. There are many other Sahih hadith that are mentioned in other works. إِنَّهُ فَاتَهُمَا كَثِيرٌ, that there are many other Sahih traditions, authentic traditions that can be found in other works, and they have missed out on them. However, they have not done this deliberately. They have done this for a reason, that they only mentioned these 7,000 or 4,000 like in Imam Muslim's book for a reason. This was, according to them, was enough for that fulfilled their criteria. So Imam Nawawi then he gives another opinion. He says, قُلْتُ وَالصَّوَابُ قَوْلُ مَنْ قَالَ. The correct opinion is of what others are saying, what others say. What have others said? لا يخرج عن الكتب الخمسة التي هي أصول الإسلام من الصحيح إلا اليسير. So in other words, like I've mentioned, like the Imams have mentioned, there are many other authentic traditions that are mentioned beside Bukhari and Muslim. This is the majority opinion. So he says لا يخرج عن الكتب الخمسة, that authentic narrations from the five works of Hadith, authentic narrations from the five major works of Hadith are not left out. The five major works of Hadith, the five major books of Hadith have not left out Sahih Hadith except for a few. Which are these five works of Hadith that have mentioned Sahih traditions? They are as follows: Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, Sunan Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi and Nasai. The two Sahihain, Sunan Abi Dawud 3, Tirmidhi 4 and Nasai 5. So these five works of Hadith have missed out on very few Sahih and authentic traditions. Very few authentic. They have mentioned all authentic traditions in their books. So وَالصَّوَابُ مَنْ قَالَ. He ends the discussion by saying, and the correct opinion is of others. لا يخرج عن الكتب الخمسة. From the five works of Hadith, i.e. the five التي هي أصول الإسلام, which are considered to be the foundational works of Islam. The five foundational Hadith works of Islam. The five foundational Hadith works of Islam. They have not left out any Sahih authentic traditions except for very few. And these five Usul al-Islam, fundamental Hadith works, are as follows: Sahihain, Sunan Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi and Nasai. Wallahu alam. So this was the opinion of Imam Nawawi Ibn Salah rahimahullah during their time in the 7th century. In the coming centuries, other works were added. The 6th work was added. Like it is mentioned in the footnote. If you were to read footnote number 3, كانت هذه كتب الحديث الأصول في العصور الأولى, that these were the major foundational Hadith works in the first era of Islam, i.e. during the considered to be the great works during their time, i.e. during the 7th century, because Ibn Salah and Imam Nawawi both were from the 7th century. So these 5 works were considered to be the Usul al-Islam. These Kutub al-Khamsa were considered to be the Usul al-Islam. Later on, وَعَلَيْهِ دَرَجُ ibn Salah wa Nawawi. This is why Ibn Salah and Imam Nawawi he has mentioned this in their works, and this is their opinion. ثم زاد بعض علماء سادسا. Then later on in the centuries after, other ulama, they have added the 6th work. So some have considered to be Muwatta Imam Malik as the 6th work of Hadith, 6th part of the Usul al-Islam, like Ibn al-Athir has done in his Jami al-Usul, and some have considered Sunan al-Darimi as the 6th work of Hadith. And then the matter remained ثم استقر الأمل. The matter remained and it settled on Sunan ibn Majah being considered to be the 6th work of Hadith, 6 important work of Hadith. So there are 6 important works of Hadith: Sahihain, Sunan Abu Dawud, Sunan Tirmidhi, Sunan Nasa'i, and Sunan ibn Majah. 2 Sahihs and 4 Sunans. So this was the third condition, third key discussion. The 4th key discussion and final discussion is, he says, الرابعة جملة ما في صحيح البخاري 7,000 حديث و275 حديثا بالأحاديث المكررة وبإسقاط المكرر 4,000. That the entire hadith collection that can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari it numbers 7,275 بالأحاديث المكررة, with all the repeated hadiths together. If you were to add the repeated hadiths together, it is around 7,000 hadith, 7,275. If you were to omit the repeated hadiths, then it would be around 4,000. Then he says Sahih Muslim أيضا نحو 4,000. Sahih Muslim also has around 4,000 hadiths in his work. بإسقاط المكرر, by omitting the repeated hadiths, if one was to omit the repeated hadiths. Wallahu alam. Then Imam Nawawi discusses further. He says ثم إن الزيادة في الصحيح على ما فيهما يعرف من كتب السنن المعتمدة. Then he says that other additional authentic narrations, where can they be found? A question arises then. So where can the other authentic narrations be found? Where can other Sahih, authentic, rigorous authentic narrations be found? So he says ثم إن الزيادة في الصحيح, then indeed additional authentic narrations besides the two على ما فيهما, besides the 2 works of Hadith, Bukhari and Muslim, they can be found from the Sunan, the relied upon Sunan works, من كتب السنن المعتمدة, the relied upon relied upon authentic works of the Sunan, like we have just mentioned, كسنن أبي داود والترمذي والنسائي, Sunan Abu Dawud, Sunan Tirmidhi, Sunan Nasa'i, وأبي بكر ibn Khuzaymah, the Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, Imam Abu Bakr ibn Khuzaymah's work, which is known as Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, Daraqutni's work, والحاكم أبي Abdullah, Imam Hakim Abu Abdullah's work, the Mustadrak, which will be discussed inshallah after this paragraph, وأبي حاتم ibn Hibban, Sahih ibn Hibban, as it is known as, وأبي بكر al-Bayhaqi, Sunan al-Bayhaqi, the work of Imam Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, وغيرهم. So these works you can find Sahih traditions, but with condition, منصوصا على صحته فيها, when all these Imams of the Sunan works and Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, Sahih ibn Hibban, and Sunan Bayhaqi, when they state in their works that they have only mentioned, they have categorized as Sahih, mansusan ala sihhati fiha, when they categorize as Sahih, when they categorize as hadith to be Sahih in their work, then it will be considered to be Sahih. Mansusan ala sihhati fiha, when it is stated fiha in their works, ala sihhatihi, by themselves, that this hadith is Sahih, that this hadith is Sahih. ولا يكفي في صحته كونه موجودا في شيء منها. So the mere existence of the hadith that can be found in these works does not qualify the hadith to be Sahih. It is only when they state that this hadith is Sahih will be qualified and classified and graded as Sahih. So, and it is not sufficient regarding their authenticity, كونه موجودا, by them being, by those hadiths, by them being found in these works, in these above mentioned works. كونه موجود في شيء منها. إلا في كتابي, except a book of hadith in which من شرط أنه لا يأتي إلا بالصحيح, except those works of hadith, or that work of hadith in which the author, primarily in his introduction, he mentions that he has only mentioned authentic traditions in his works. إلا في كتاب, except a work of hadith in which the Imam, he conditions that he has not recorded and mentioned except but Sahih, authentic traditions. Like which works? ككتاب ibn Khuzaymah. Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, he has stated primarily that he has only mentioned Sahih traditions. والكتب المخرجة على الصحيحين, and those works of hadith that document the hadith of Sahihain, like example ككتابي أبوي بكر ibn إسماعيل, ككتابي أبوي بكر الإسماعيلي والبرقاني, like the two books of Abu Bakr Ismail and Abu Bakr Burqani. ككتابي استثنية كتابين, أبوين was أبويني, so both were known as Abu Bakr, their names were Abu Bakr. So the book of Abu Bakr Ismail and Abu Bakr Burqani, وكتاب أبي عوانة الإسفرايني وغيرهما, and the book of Abu Awana Isfaraini and others. So they have conditioned that they have only mentioned Sahih traditions. Then he mentions an important note regarding Imam Hakim, Abu Abdullah al-Hafiz, as he is known as. واعتنى الحاكم أبو عبد الله الحافظ. Imam Hakim Abu Abdullah al-Hafiz, he has paid attention. اعتنى means he has paid attention. What has he mentioned? Imam Hakim Abu Abdullah al-Hafiz, he has paid attention بضبط الزائد من الصحيح على ما في الصحيحين, by mentioning, what he has done is in his book Mustadrak, by mentioning additional authentic hadith based on the Sahihain, بضبط الزائد من الصحيح, by mentioning additional zaid, authentic hadith من الصحيح, based on the Sahihain. So what he does is فجمعه في كتاب المستدرك. Imam Hakim Abu Abdullah, he gathers all those hadith in his Mustadrak. His work is known as Mustadrak al-Hakim. So فجمعه في كتاب المستدرك ذكر ما ليس في واحد من الصحيحين. He mentions those hadith that are not to be found in Bukhari and Muslim, but they fulfill the criteria of Imam Bukhari and Muslim, or one of theirs, or he mentions certain hadith and he grades them according to his personal judgment as Sahih. So فجمعه في كتاب المستدرك, he gathers in his work المستدرك ذكر ما ليس في واحد من الصحيحين, by mentioning those hadith that are not to be found in the two Sahihain, مما رآه على شرطهما, from those ahadith that he deems that they are also on the condition of Bukhari and Muslim. So he'll mention hadiths that fulfill the criteria of Imam Bukhari and Muslim, or fulfills the criteria of one of them, أو الشرط أحدهما, or أو أدى اجتهاده إلى صحته, or he will mention hadiths that his personal judgment has led him to deem the hadith sahih. He will mention those hadiths in his work. أو أدى اجتهاده إلى صحته. So basically he will mention three types of hadith: Sahihun ala shart al-Shaykhain, Sahihun ala shart Muslim, or Sahihun ala shart al-Bukhari. So ومعنى كونه على شرطهما أنهما أخرجا لرواته في صحيحيهما. What does he mean by على شرطهما? What does he mean by على شرطهما? That أنهما أخرجا لرواته في صحيحهما. That the ruwat of the hadith that Hakim will mention are similar to the ruwat that are mentioned by Shaykhain, or by Imam Bukhari, or by Imam Muslim. The hadiths that Imam Hakim will narrate are narrated by the same or similar type of narrators that are mentioned in the Shaykhain, or by one of them, Imam Bukhari or Muslim. Then he mentions a point regarding Imam Hakim. Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he is considered by the scholars of hadith to be mutasahil fit tasheeh, lenient in the matter of grading and classifying a hadith as sahih. Mutasahil fit tasheeh. معروف عند أهل العلم بذلك. This is well known amongst the scholars of ilm, that Imam Hakim, he is mutasahil, he is lenient in grading hadith to be sahih. والمشاهدة تدل عليه. And mushahada, observation, it points to this as well throughout the generations from the scholars in each generation. فينبغي أن يقال, so it will be appropriately said, فينبغي أن يقال, so it will be appropriate to say that ما صححه, any hadith that is categorized as sahih by Imam Hakim, ولم نجد لغيره من المعتمدين فيه تصحيحا ولا تضعيفا, and we do not find any other imams, any other reliable, authentic imams who have not graded the hadith as sahih or da'if, who have not graded the hadith which Imam Hakim has graded as sahih. If other imams have not graded as sahih or da'if, then we will grade Imam Hakim's graded hadith to be what? حكمنا بأنه حسن. We will judge and we will classify it as that it is Hasan. It is Hasan. It is not Sahih, as Imam Hakim has mentioned. We will grade it as, and we will judge it as Sahih, Hasan. يحتج به, and one can seek proof from it too as well. إلا أن تظهر علة تضعفه, except if you were to find a hidden defect, then in that case we will not grade it as Hasan. We will not grade it as Hasan. إلا أن تظهر علة تضعفه, except if we were to find a hidden defect that makes it ضعيف, that makes the hadith ضعيف. Similarly to Imam Hakim's work is the work of Ibn Hibban's too as well. ويقارب في حكمه, and similar to the ruling, just like of Imam Hakim, is also the work of Sahih Abi Hatim Ibn Hibban. Wallahu alam. When Ibn Hibban rahimahullah, when he grades a hadith to be sahih, we will also look into what the other imams have said, whether they have said it to be sahih or da'if. If this is not the case, then we will judge it as Hasan. So this is our 4 key discussions that today we were going to discuss. Going back to the slides and summarizing the 4 key discussions. So this was the types of hadith. There are 3 types of hadith: Sahih, Hasan and Da'if. This is the first issue. So we defined the definition, we defined what is Sahih Hadith and the nature of it. Al-Hadith al-Sahih. It has these 5 conditions. It has these 5 conditions: that the isnad is continuous. 1, it is narrated by trustworthy, adil, upright narrators, and they are also precise and accurate when they transmit the hadith from their memory or book, and it is free from contradictions and hidden defects. So these are the conditions briefly. This has to be found, and this has to be, and this should not be found. So these 3 have to be found in the hadith, and it has to be free from these following things. So the meaning of Sahih Hadith. This is what he means. إنه صحيح فمعناه ما ذكرنا. When a hadith is classified as Sahih, it means that it is fulfilling the 5 conditions that were mentioned in the Sahih definition. When a hadith is classified as غير Sahih, it is classified as غير Sahih because it is not fulfilling the above conditions that were mentioned. لم يصح إسناده على هذا الوجه المعتبر. Its meaning is that its chain of narration is not based on the above considered, i.e. mentioned reasons and elements, conditions that are found in the definition. لا أنه كذب في نفس الأمر. It is not to be said that it is kadhib, it is a lie, it is false, it is wrong. In reality, it could be sahih, but due to not fulfilling the above conditions, it is considered to be غير sahih. So not necessarily false in reality. That's what we need to understand. So there are many levels of sahih, according to the strength of and conditions of according to the strength of conditions, which will be mentioned later on. Issue number 2. So authentic chain. Which is the most authentic chain? So there's no absolute authentic chain as such. One cannot say that this is the most authentic. There are many authentic chains. In other words, there are many authentic chains. One cannot say categorically that this chain is the most authentic, because the judgment remains difficult. So in other words, the preference is relative, and every imam will choose according to his preference and his understanding of the hadith in its wholesome and general manner. And these are all the opinions of the imams, which we discuss, the 6 opinions of the imams. The 6 varied opinions. This Imam Bukhari's, according to him, is the most authentic is Malik, Nafi and Umar. And this was the final opinion. The issue number 3. Who are the first compilers of Sahih, in which they have only mentioned Sahih traditions, authentic Sahih traditions. These are the 2 Imams, Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim ibn Hajjaj, rahimahullah. So Imam Shafi's statement was before the existence of the 2 books. So there are varied opinions regarding the most authentic book. So like I said, Imam mentioned in the book that the most authentic opinion is that Imam Bukhari, Sahih al-Bukhari is the most authentic. Although other scholars like Hafiz Nisaburi and the Maghrib scholars, they were of the opinion that Imam Muslim's Muslim is the most authentic. But the most correct view is, Imam Bukhari is the most authentic. So it is due to a distinguished feature that and this distinguished feature is that Imam Muslim gathers all the various chain of narrations of a hadith in one place. This is the unique feature of Imam Muslim's work. This is why some scholars consider it to be the most authentic. So did Imam Bukhari Muslim gather all the Sahih? No. They did not make it binding upon themselves. There are other works that have authentic traditions. So the scope of Sahih collections are found in other works too as well. So the two Sahih and then other Sahih collections are as follows: Sunan Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Ibn Majah, and so on. The fourth and final discussion is as follows. We have just discussed that Imam Bukhari has mentioned around 7,000. If we were to omit, that it would be 4,000, and similarly, Imam Muslim's also is around 4,000. So this is what the scholars say. Sahih Bukhari has 7,275 hadith with repetitions, 4,000 without repetitions. And similarly, Muslim also has around 4,000 without repetitions. So beyond the two Sahih, there are many other works that have compiled the Sahih authentic traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, like these works: Sunan Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi, Nasai, Abu Bakr ibn Khuzaymah, Sunan Daraqutni, Hakim Abi Abdullah, his Mustadrak, Sahih ibn Hibban, Sunan al-Bayhaqi, and so on. A specific point regarding Hakim's Mustadrak, that Imam Hakim, he is considered to be a lenient scholar, but however he has done a great work by mentioning hadith that fulfill the criteria of Sahihain or one of theirs, or hadith that he personally judged as hadith as authentic. Then we conclude and say regarding Imam Hakim's leniency that Imam Hakim was considered to be mutasahil according to many scholars of hadith. So Imam Hakim was considered to be lenient in declaring authenticity. However, we will count his hadith authentication as Hasan if we do not find any other mu'tabar, relied upon scholar of hadith, stating it to be Hasan, Sahih or Da'if. Unless a defect appears. Then we will consider it to be lower than Hasan. So closer to this work of Imam Hakim is also the work of Sahih ibn Hibban too as well. So this ends our lesson and summary to today's lesson, that we introduced the hadith categories outlined by the author, and then introduced the category of Sahih Hadith, and As-Sahul Asanid, defined Sahih Hadith, and then we discussed the first four key issues related to Sahih Hadith. and we discussed some points regarding the Sihahs, the two Sahihain, and the difference between the two great works of Imam Bukhari and Muslim. So we end our lesson. If you have any questions, please let us know through the forum, and Jazakumullah khairan for participating. Until our next lesson, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullah for participating.